changed since 9/11 was the risk calculus more than the specifics of intelligence. You now think you can go down the UN route to get Iraq by focusing on their weapons of mass destruction. Does that not make the specifics of the intelligence on WMD more important than if it's just sort of part of this broader sense of the dangers of the regime?
That's absolutely correct, Sir Lawrence, and that's why it was important, obviously. We came under pressure, and in the lead up to the publication of the dossier in September 2002, we came under enormous pressure to say, well, what does our intelligence actually tell us? That's why between March 2002 and the actual publication, on the 24th of September 2002, we had further intelligence reports, and obviously the Joint Intelligence Committee was incredibly active during that period in assessing what the threat was and the evidence was.
Now, this leads us naturally to the September dossier, and we've had a lot in these hearings about the origins and production of the dossier, and I don't want to go into all of that now. But two issues do stand out. The particular question of the 45-minute claim and the more general assertion that the intelligence was beyond doubt. The 45-minute claim is very specific but very controversial. Is it fair to say that the intelligence referred to chemical, possibly biological, munitions for short-range battlefield use, but that specificity was lost in the document?
It's absolutely right that that was what it was to do with. In respect to the 45 minutes, as you know, I think it's just worth pointing out this was a headline, I think, in the Evening Standard newspaper the next day.
And the Sun and the Express.
I've said on many occasions, not least to the Butler inquiry, it would have been better to have corrected in the light of the significance it later took on. But can I just point one thing out, Sir Lawrence? She did an analysis between the publication of the dossier on the 24th of September 2002 and the BBC broadcast at the end of May 2003, which alleged that we, Downing Street, had inserted this into the dossier, probably knowing it was wrong, right? And then, of course, obviously, that then kicked off a huge controversy that goes on to this day. Between September 2002 and the end of May 2003, there were 40,000 written parliamentary questions on Iraq. It was mentioned twice. There were 5,000 oral questions. It was not mentioned at all. In the 18th of March, nobody mentions it. So,
I can think of a speech by Jack Straw in February where he does mention it.
But all I'm saying is that
I appreciate
ex post facto, this has taken on a far greater significance than it ever did at the time.
And I think it's taken on that significance possibly because it's taken as an indication of how evidence that may be pointed was given even more point in the way that the dossier was written. So there's a question about its impact, and we may agree that it was an immediate impact, but it's then declined. But the fact of the way that it was developed and reported was misleading. It suggested that it was something more than battlefield munitions. Did you understand the difference between the 45 minutes relating to battlefield munitions and, say, a long-range missile?
I didn't focus on it a great deal at the time because it was mentioned by me, and then, as I say, it was never actually mentioned again by me. And as I indicated to the Butler inquiry, in the light of what subsequently happened and the importance it subsequently took on, it would have most certainly been better to have corrected it. However, if I could just make this point about the, where you quite rightly say, well, of course, it's not surprising it takes on significance because of all the controversy, quite rightly, over the intelligence that was wrong. It was for that very reason that we held the Hutton inquiry, which was a 6-month inquiry, precisely into whether we had indeed inserted this from Downing Street into the dossier, and of course we didn't. And the JIC was the...
I think it's been established that in that sense, the dossier wasn't doctored by an improper insertion of false intelligence. It's more a question of how a particular bit of intelligence was interpreted and presented, losing its specificity and gaining a broader meaning. So, just to clarify from what you said, you seem to be saying that you hadn't actually paid a lot of attention to this, so that when it appeared in the foreword, and the phrase is well known about the 45 minutes, you weren't particularly aware yourself that you were saying something that went beyond what the intelligence would really allow?
Correct. And as I say, I mentioned it, I think, in my statement on the 24th of September, but I mentioned it without any great emphasis, and I mentioned, I think, in reasonably sensible terms.
But when, and you've already mentioned, not just the Standard, but a number of newspaper reports the next day headlined this. It wasn't just a question of it appearing as sort of one part of a long discussion. Presumably at this point it must have struck you that something had hit home. Were you at all concerned that in an issue of such moment that intelligence intelligence of a certain nature was getting an exaggerated sense of importance?
You know, the thing that strikes me most now, when you go back and look at the dossier and how it was received, it was actually received as somewhat dull and cautious at the time.
Yes, we've been told. Yeah.
You know, it really assumed a vastly greater importance at a later time, precisely because of the allegation, which was an extraordinarily serious one, that we, Downing Street, had deliberately falsified the intelligence, which of course we hadn't.
I mean, the importance of the dossier, of course, is in part of its immediate political impact. And no doubt you're right to say the general view that this was telling us what we already knew. But if it was saying something quite important, that we had detailed intelligence on Iraqi WMD that led you to certain conclusions. And therefore, in a sense, if it was considered old news, it was because you'd already been successful in establishing that point of view.
I don't think it was us that was successful in establishing that point of view. I think you would have been hard pushed to have found virtually anybody who doubted he had WMD and a WMD capability and program, because we'd been through this whole saga of 10 years of military action. As I say, I took the first military action in respect of Baghdad with President Clinton in 1998. So it wasn't that so much. And incidentally, I just point out that in the statement with the dossier, which I think, to be frank, it was the statement people would have heard rather than the foreword, I actually say specifically, why now, people ask. I agree, I cannot say that this month or next, even this year or next, Saddam will use his weapons. So the issue was not, he's about to launch an attack.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. What I'm trying to get at is the quality of the intelligence, because, just to take an example, President Chirac, certainly in September 2002, seemed to believe that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. But I think he also said, but I've seen no proof. And the issue that is now important, because you've decided to go down the UN route, is that that detail is going to be tested. Indeed, you had a press conference with President Yeltsin in October where he said he didn't believe in it, and you said, well, that's for the inspectors to find out. I think you did. So
yeah, no, I was merely reflecting on the fact that well, there's a whole issue to do with Russia and its view of how to proceed.
There is indeed a view, but what I'm